And welcome back. Here we are to continue building our weather app. And in the last video, we got the app basically working here. We can type in a zip code 94011, and then it shows the temperature there. But we could show more information here, right? So let's take a look at our app so far and talk about how we can kind of expand on the data that's displayed. Currently, we're displaying all of the data here in this H1. So this H1 is showing the temperature right there, right? So if you remember from the previous video, we're using this ternary operator, which is the question mark and the colon, right? So if data is not defined or null, then we skip over to the colon and we display null. And null in React terms shows, nada, right? It doesn't show anything. If data is any kind of truthy value, then we're going to be in this area here between the question mark and the colon, and we're going to show this H1. Now, what I need to have more tags in here. Like I got to have a whole bunch more tags if I want to show like the description of the data and the humidity and the air pressure and like any of the other data, but it's going to be hard to fit that in here. So what would be good for us is to make a component that is responsible for displaying all of the weather data information, right? So we'll make a component. We can just put one component in here and pass the data to it, okay? So let's do that. I'm going to make a new file. So I'll go into my components here, and I'll make a brand new file, and I'll call it weatherdisplay.js, okay? Let's make sure this is in our source directory, right? So I can see that it's here, it's in the same level as all this stuff in the source directory, right? So, and then we could add a style sheet for this too, right? So why don't we do that now? I'll click here and say weatherdisplay.css. Okay, so now I have my style sheet and I've got my weather component. Let's write this one from scratch. So what we're going to do is we're going to import our weather display.css. Oh wait, I put that in the CSS file. Hold on, that was a mistake. Let's go get weather display.js. Here we are, right? So we're going to import weather display CSS, and then we're going to make a function named weather display. And components, this is going to be a component, right? So components, we're always going to export them so we can use them somewhere else in our project. So at the bottom here, I'll say export default weather display. Okay, so we just export this function from this component. Components also can take in values that let you configure them to how they work, right? So that's called props, and it's always a parameter to the function. So I'm going to type props here, and we're going to take props in, okay? And a component always needs to return the JSX, or the HTML that it's going to render, right? And we write that in this JSX syntax. So it looks like HTML, but you're writing it in JavaScript, so it's JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript and XML. So it's basically an extension of the JavaScript language that lets us write, our JavaScript with an XML-like syntax, right? So I'm going to add some HTML or JSX inside my return statement. I've used the parentheses here so I could use a multiple line, return on multiple lines, right? Otherwise we have to just put it on a single line, right? Which isn't going to work here. So I got my div there. Let's give it a class name, right? So this is a pretty standard pattern here. We'll say weather display. We'll name it after the component, right? So now if I was to go into weather display CSS, I could say, dot weather display, and I would be styling this div over here, right? And then I could use, any of the descendant or child selectors in CSS to select the children or descendants of this element, right? So, if I wanted to select, an H1 in here, I could say space H1, right? So this would be an H1 that's inside a weather display, right? So this is kind of good. We put like a top level tag, and then we can target anything inside it. Okay, so let's imagine here we want to show an H1, and what I want to do is on this props object, I want to set the temperature and then get the temperature here. Okay, so I'll put in props.temp. Okay, so that means it has to have a temp property. And then maybe underneath it, I'll say props.description, and I'll just shorten that to DESC, right? And we'll show the description here. So now how do we use this component in our weather component? So I'm going to switch to weather.js, and I'm going to go to the top here and import weather display from, and then I'll do the / and choose weather display from my menu here, or you can just type the name. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to take the weather display and put it down here inside the return statement. So instead of this H1, right, because remember I have the H1 is inside the weather display now, so I want to put it here, right, and put the angle brackets around it like this, right? And then we'll use that component here. Now my problem is that I need to set the value for the props that we defined. So I defined a prop called temp and a prop called DESC, description, right? So the props are going to be defined in here. So if I say temp equals, right, I can put a value in there. I could say 70 degrees, but it's not 70 degrees right now, right? So I need to get that value from my data, okay? And the data, if you recall, actually it's giving me an error there, right? Let's just put the 70 in there, right, for now. So if you recall, it's not very nice. It's got like a lot of complicated, nested elements, right? Let's actually, before we get there too, let's not forget to include the description here. So I'm going to put description. I'm going to say, actually, we don't even need that. Let's just put this guy here. We'll say cloudy today, right? Okay. So now if I submit there, it says 70 degrees and cloudy, right? So I got this guy, and we can see that temperature and description are being passed into here as props.temp and props.description, right? Okay. But now we need to get the regular value. Let's take a look again at our object in the console here. So if you remember, we're logging the JSON object, like I've got the JSON here, and I'm logging it to the console, right? This says city not found. Let's actually do a valid city, 94011. And, oh yeah, there's my object there. I did it twice, right? So you can see it's got object, and then I've got, base stations, clouds, COD, and I've got all these properties. And this is actually kind of hard for us to work through. Like, so to get temp, I got to do, data, which is the object.main.temp, right? So that makes this look kind of, complicated, right? And then if I want to get to description, it's going to be, I think that one's under weather, which is actually an array. So we open that up, and it's got one item in it, and then it has main and description, right? So I got to put, what's this going to be? It's going to be weather bracket 0 description, right? So this one's going to be even uglier, right? So if we do this, if we say data dot weather bracket 0 dot description, right? And then we can have our description. Let's give it a test here. Oh yeah, it looks like it's working. Broken clouds, 50 degrees, right? But that's getting pretty ugly, and this line is getting really long. So let's kind of improve on this, right? So what I want to do is just get the data that I want, but maybe I'll just get it here, right, when we load it. So when we load it, we'll sort out our data here, and then what we'll do is we'll set that on our data object. So let's do that. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say const, and I'll just make a variable for each of the things, right? We could write this in a few ways, but maybe we'll just do one line per property. So maybe right here we'll say temp, because that's the name of the property I want to use, and then we'll say json.main.temp. Okay, and then let's get we'll even shorten this to description. So I'll say description equals json.weather bracket 0 dot, and then here we got to just spell out description, right? And we could keep going, right? So I'll put a dot there, right? And now what I want to do is, instead of attaching the main JSON object here, the whole thing, I'm going to make an object here just with the curly brackets, and I'll give it the property of temp and the property of description. So I'll take these two values that I made and add them to the object here, and now this data object is going to be the one that we set on data. So that means here I can shorten this whole thing to data.temp, and this one can be data.description. And another shortcut that we can use is, since I've used the same name here for this property and this property, right? So I have temp is the temp attribute or temp prop, right? And this is description or DESC, it's the same name as this one. The shortcut here is we can get rid of these, put the curly braces, and then do ... data, right? So this spread operator says, like, hey, let's just take all the properties here and make an attribute or make a prop for each one of these properties inside this object, right? So it'll make one for each of these. And the great thing is, if we add a third property, then this would take care of it, and we don't have to do any changes here, right? You know, so for example, if I wanted to get like the name right here, right? So I could say, why don't we do const name equals JSON.name, and then I can add name right here, and now I'll have a name down here, right? It's a little complicated, right? But you know, if we have the name here, then now when we go into weather display, we could add a name over here. So maybe I'll add a small tag, right? So I'll say small, and then I'll put props.name, right? And you know, we could even go even further here. This props object can also be deconstructed. So inside here, instead of saying props.temp, props.description, props.name, we can also do you know, const curly brackets, and then we can say temp description name. I'm going to just do them all 4-letter words, right? So and then we'll say props, right? So I'll deconstruct props into these variables, and then now in here I can shorten each one of these to just the 4-letter name, right? Oh, so there's Burlingame there, right? There's the location, cloud. So now we could add some styles. So here's a challenge for you, is maybe add some more properties. Look in here and see if there's any other interesting weather information that you want to display, and add it here to your component and include it here in the object, right? Deconstruct it here and then add it to your object. And then the second challenge is add some styles here for your display object, right? So I feel like I want to remove some of this margin between these two things there, right? But you do whatever you think is right there, and add some styles. So anyway, thanks for watching, and maybe we'll continue in the next video.